If you're a nurse and you're moving to New Zealand, then you are going to love today's show. Today, I interviewed 3 nurses, 2 from the US, 1 from the UK, who have all moved to New Zealand to work as nurses in the past 6 months. They tell us the ups, the downs, the realities of what it's like to work in a hospital as a nurse in New Zealand. So let's jump into the show and meet Victoria, Katie and Maile and find out just what being a nurse in New Zealand is really like.
Got it.
Welcome to the NZ Ahead podcast. Everything you need to know about moving to and living in New Zealand.
There's a whole world here.
So nice to be with you again.
We call it Aotearoa around here, bro.
You'll be right.
We are your hosts, Liz and Brian.
Amazing New Zealand in the southern seas.
See, that's where I belong. That's home.
Okay, so welcome, nurses, to the podcast. So excited to have all 3 of you here. Can we just jump in and just introduce each one of you and say which hospital you work at and how long you've been working there, first of all? That would be great. Should we start with Victoria?
Yes, I work at a hospice. So I work at Tiamanga Hospice in Wellington in Lower Hutt. So I will probably have quite a different perspective and possibly no understanding of how the DHBs and hospitals work here. That said, my experience back home in the UK, I have a bit more experience of the socialised healthcare side of things. So hopefully got some bit more input. So I'm a palliative care nurse.
And when did you move from the UK?
So we landed the 1st of September. I didn't start until the beginning of October in my job.
Right. So you've been here you've been in New Zealand about 6 months then?
Yeah, 6 months.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Victoria. Katie?
I moved over almost exactly a year ago. We started MIQ 18th of March, 2021. Can't believe that went fast. And I'm currently in the ICU at Southern DHB.
Right. Can I just ask what DHB stands for?
District Health Board.
Okay, thank you. Because I keep seeing that. And Maile, everyone knows who you are, Maile, but go on, pretend they don't.
I'm Maile. We got here last July, and I work at Southern District Health Board, the same hospital as Katie actually, but I work on a ward for mental health for older people. So a lot of dementia, chronic mental health issues.
Okay, thank you. This has been one of those podcasts that I've been dying to do, actually. I couldn't wait because I know nothing about nursing and hospitals and the healthcare system. And we have so many nurses and healthcare workers coming over, and they've got so many questions. So to have you 3 here to give us that view of like what, because that's all you want to know, isn't it? It's like, oh, I've got all these questions. What do they do? Yeah, how different is it from the UK or from the States? So what we've done is we've put a list of questions together. We asked our community, and they, some of the nurses there said, oh, can you ask the nurses this? Can you ask them that? So I've written that down. And also Maile very kindly put a load of stuff down on a piece of paper for me to read through, and you're going to answer those questions. So forgive me if I sound like I don't know what I'm talking about, because I don't, but you 3 do. So I'm going to ask you the questions, and we can just go from there. How does that sound?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can we just talk about patient ratios, support staff, the attitude of doctors and nurses, the attitudes of families and patients? Should we just talk about that first of all? So just the general environment. Who wants to go first? Victoria.
I guess I'll start.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
No, go, Kate.
I love Zoom. So in the ICU, because I know we have quite a few in hospital or acute care workers coming over. The ICU here is very different to the States in the sense that here we're 1-to-1. In the States, it's 2. Well, in California, it's 2-to-1, where I'm from. But it is one-to-one, but your patient is not restrained. Your patient is, you're doing all of the washing, you're doing all of the cleaning of the rooms when someone's transferred out. You're acting as like the EVS personnel, and you're running the ventilators, so there's no respiratory therapist. You're running dialysis, and we generally, in the Southern DHB, we generally do CRRT or continuous renal therapy. So, yeah, there's a lot extra that you're doing here. The doctors will start IVs for you. I smile because you'd get slapped if you said that in the States. If you asked a doctor to do an IV for you. What else? And yeah, there's more that you're responsible for. You're also drawing up medications. You're mixing your antibiotics. You're hand pushing your antibiotics rather than hanging them in a bag. You are doing all sorts of things like that sometimes you have a bit more help in the States with.
Okay. Anyone want to add anything to that?
That does sound quite similar to in the UK. I had a limited placement as a student nurse in ICU, and it does seem like, obviously, any UK nurses that have worked in ICU might be able to have more input, but just from my limited experience, that it sounds like the New Zealand system is more like the UK.
Yeah, the British nurses have had a lot easier time adjusting to it than some of the American nurses. But yeah. I think we're based on the British system, so it's quite similar.
Yeah.
I know, Maile, you've talked before about that feeling of like Katie just said, basically you're doing a lot more of the things yourself rather than having the help I think you said in the States they had more people did designated things, but here you're just expected to get on. And do you feel like that?
Yeah, so it's a mixed bag, because as a nurse here, I am expected to get the patient up out of bed, shower them, bathe them, help with breakfast, help with toileting, which in the States would be something that the mental health aides would do, or the hospital aides. But in the States, I would probably have 5 to 7 patients, maybe more. And on my ward, if I have more than 3 patients, it's considered a heavy load. So if I have 4 patients, that's like a heavy load here, because you're doing more. The difference is that there's a lot more people around to help. So in the States, I often felt like I'm just on my own. If I needed help with something, everybody's way too busy. There's nobody to ask for help. The managers are, who knows where they are, like they're too busy to come help on the floor. So it's one of those, like, yeah, I'm doing less, but I have more patients and I have no help if I need it. Whereas my current ward, I may have 4 patients and I'm doing everything for them, but the assistant manager is on the floor and the clinical nurse specialist is on the floor. And we have people, occupational therapists who are helping out. And then we just have extra support staff. So you're not having to do all of that stuff by yourself.
Right.
So I would say my experience is there's a lot more help if you need it, and people are checking in with you. They're making sure you're getting your break. They're making sure you're getting your lunch. In the US, if you get a full half-hour lunch break, that's a good day.
Yeah.
Here, if you don't get a half-hour break, that's like a crazy busy day. And you're getting paid for it.
Even on those crazy busy days, they're like, no, go. We'll do your work for you. Go. You can't miss your break.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, what about schedules and rosters? That's what I've just written down here, Maile. maybe you wanna just tell me what that means. Schedules and rosters. What does that mean?
That's very different here than in the States, at least for for people from the US. I don't know about from the UK, but in the US you can often get a set schedule. So you're only doing day or you're only doing nights, and it's usually 12-hour shifts. And like my last full-time job, I worked every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, so 3 12-hour shifts. I knew my schedule every week. And that was really nice in some ways. In other ways, it got kind of old. But here it's a rotating roster. So you're working, at least on my ward, 8-hour shifts. And then you're working either the morning shift one week, and then maybe the afternoon shift the next week, and then maybe overnight the week after. Or sometimes you're doing 2 or 3 different shifts in one week. And so you can't ever count on your schedule being the same. And you get your roster about 6 weeks out in advance. So, that's a big difference. And a lot of people from the US don't like that because their schedule is all over the place.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if I'd like that, because you can't really plan, can you? Well, you can if you can plan 6 weeks, but I suppose I don't know if I'd like. I don't know which one I'd like best. I think I'd prefer to know that I was doing those hours, and that's what I was always doing. So, what about you, Victoria? What was it like in the UK?
I think it would be similar, really. We generally, you would be on a rostered and rotating basis, but they would accept requests to have set days. So in my last job, I was a district nurse, and we worked long days. So they were like 12-hour days. So I worked Tuesdays and Fridays and one weekend a month. So that was what I negotiated, but you would have to negotiate that unless you worked in a specific Monday to Friday role, like specialist nurses or clinics or something. Or like say day theatres, sometimes they're Monday to Friday, but generally the norm is rostered and rotating. Right. Yeah, and that's the same for this role I have here, rostered and rotating. So it's fun because I didn't work nights before, so I'm back to working night shifts that I haven't done in a very long time. So it is hard to get used to it.
Yeah. I was talking to Sherry. She works on the maternity ward up in Auckland, and that's what she said. She said, I gave up nights years and years ago, and she said, so to be back here now doing nights. Does it work the same as when you're a nurse? The only other night shift I know, my brother was a policeman, and it, like, the higher the rank you went up, then you didn't have to do nights. Like, it was at the nights. So all of you have to do nights, right?
The only ones who don't do nights are generally the assistant charge nurse managers or the charge nurse manager, which would be the equivalent of manager or assistant manager in the States. But everybody else rotates. I actually find the schedule much more flexible here, because in ICU and on the wards you can do 8s and 12s. So, or depending on your FTE, I find it much more flexible. If you have kids, they're quite flexible with weekends, at least where I'm at. And, generally the single people who want to make more money do the weekends. So.
Are you able to like swap with people? Or you say, can you say to your friend, I don't want to, you can do that. So you can say, will you do my nights next week? Oh, that's good. Yeah. So it's flexible like that then.
There's a lot of times too, I don't know about you guys, but they're like, I've got my kid's kindy graduation this day. Can someone cover me for 2 hours? And, people will come in and cover you for 2 hours, and then you go back to work and it's no big deal.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, can we talk about salary? And Maile's written salary, working with unions, holiday hours, differential pay. So, yeah, let's talk about that. Salary. What did you want to say, Maile, about the salary?
The salary is different here in that it's negotiated with the union. So it's a flat rate for depending on your experience and how long you've been a nurse. It's a flat rate through the whole country. Mm-hmm. So you can find out quite easily what you're going to be making because it's online. It's, on the nursing union. Whereas in the States, it all depends on what state you're in, if you're with what kind of hospital you're with. There's like a huge range in the States of what you could be making in nursing. Whereas here, it's, like I said, it's kind of the same depending on your experience.
Right.
I would add to that, though, that's for the DHBs.
That's for the DHB, yeah.
It's quite difficult, really, because the DHBs have just negotiated a pay rise that, well, I say they were negotiated for a long time. It went through not so long ago, and it's taken so long that actually they're now negotiating their next pay rise. Everyone who doesn't work in the DHB then negotiates separately for pay parity with the DHBs. So where I'm working, we were under a multi-employer collective agreement where all the hospices would join together and negotiate on pay and anything else that they need to negotiate on. That only went through. So we're now behind, basically. We're always playing catch up with the DHBs. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you might expect that if you work in any community services, your pay would be a bit lower, but you can look into that online. You can look up what the multi-employment agreements are, the MECAs. You can find out what you would be earning, basically, if you're working in a hospice or in primary care or something.
Victoria, how does your pay relate? How does it compare to what you were getting in the UK for what you were doing?
I am working a few more hours because I had to, in order to meet the visa requirements, you have to work at least 0.8 of full time. So that's what I'm working, and I was probably working about 0.6 or 0.7 back home. But otherwise, it's about the same, I'd say.
Yeah.
I think I do end up with a little bit more because now I'm doing night shifts. They pay a little bit more. There's different things like in our agreement. Like we were under the MECA, I said, but we went rogue the last one because our nurses didn't want to agree to those terms. So we're now under a SECA, a single employer. It's confusing. But we actually negotiated for one non-clinical day a month. So we get one day that we can work on our PDRP. Which is our continued professional development. Right. So that's quite good there. So there's things that they negotiate for that not just pay, but conditions. That's quite helpful. And it seems to be a lot more successful than the unions in the UK. The unions in the UK just get shot down completely. Just haven't had pay increases really in real terms for a very long time in the UK.
Why do you think they're more successful? Why do you think the union's more successful here?
I'm not sure, actually. I don't know if I don't know. I know that just with the governments we've had in the UK, not to go into it too much, certainly haven't wanted to. There's been a pay freeze in the UK for a very long time. Not for MPs for some reason, but but yeah, for public sector workers. So I think they've just stuck with that. But yeah, it's it just seems to work a lot better in New Zealand, and I'm not sure exactly why.
Actually, based on my yearly salary, because we thought about going to the UK before coming here, and we actually make more here than the nurses do in the UK, a good deal amount as well.
Really?
And I'm talking like, I think I had 8 years of experience at the time, and it was like maybe £30,000 in London. And I don't know how to survive on that, really.
London as well.
Where they do it.
Yeah.
But my colleagues from the UK have said they couldn't save any money when they were living there. And even working in private hospitals. And then here, we make a good bit more than the UK nurses.
What about holidays and stuff like that? What holidays are you entitled to as a nurse?
If you dream of moving to New Zealand, then you are going to love what I'm about to share with you. 12 years ago, when me and Bri emigrated to New Zealand, we were scouring the internet, trying to find any information that we could about what our life would be like when we got here. And basically all we had was YouTube. So we made this vow. We said, when we get to New Zealand, we're going to create something that we can share with others that answers those questions that you're so desperate to know about. Like, what is your life going to be like when you get here? And that's what I'm here to offer you today. We have created a 5-day free, absolutely free video guide that shows you what it's really like to live in New Zealand. This stuff is unique and it is fabulous. You are not going to find it anywhere else on the internet. And like I say, it's absolutely free. You'll be sent a video every day for 5 days and you will know what it's like in New Zealand. So head over to the website. It's www.nzahead/free. One more time, that's www.nzahead/free. You are going to love it.
What about holidays and stuff like that? What holidays are you entitled to as a nurse?
Oh, that's where it gets interesting.
Go on, let's get in.
Well, like today, Maile and I in Dunedin have our Otago anniversary day, which is a public holiday here. Each area has one. So if it's on, I think, Maile, correct me if I'm wrong, because I still don't fully understand it, but if like the holiday's on Friday, you also get a stat day or extra pay on Monday. So
yeah, and
yeah,
I know we get, if you work today, you get it, and if you work Wednesday.
Oh.
Why it's not Tuesday, I don't know, but somebody at work told me Wednesday is also considered public holiday. So
it's that so you get extra pay and you earn extra time off as well.
Well, that's good. So how many holidays do you get all through? Because loads of people ask this, don't they? They're like, oh, yeah, well, the New Zealand get a lot more public holidays than the UK or from the US. I've never actually sat down and counted both, but do you feel like you get more time?
There's one more public holiday, I think, than we have in the UK. And it would work in the same way as the UK. And I think we have 20 days annual leave. In the UK, because I'd worked so long, I had accrued, because I've worked over 10 years in the NHS, I had accrued a lot more holiday. So I have got a little bit less holiday because I'm starting from scratch. But yeah, it's not too dissimilar from the UK.
Right.
Yeah, but here we get our sick leave. So once I've worked a year, I'll get my sick leave bank. I'll get my holiday bank, and I earn time off as well each shift I work. Whereas in the States, my sick and my holiday were in the same bank and I had to earn it. So with now 9 years, I probably would make maybe 3 weeks a year. Whereas here you're guaranteed 4 weeks a year, and some jobs more. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, and if you work evening or night shift, you actually earn extra holiday hours. So it kind of, and you get a shift differential. So you're making more money working those shifts, and then you're accruing more holiday hours.
Oh, that's quite good then. So it's not, that's a bit of an incentive, isn't it? Like, if you know you've got to do a night, you're like, oh, well, at least I'm getting a bit more. So it just goes towards an extra bit of holiday for you, does it? Or just a bit of extra pay?
Yeah. A bit of both. Yeah.
What's it like? Say if you've been working how long is your shift? Did you say 8 hours?
I do 8 hours.
Okay. So say you're on your ward working and you've been there 8 hours and it's time for you to go home now. And what is there ever the time when someone says you just can't leave, you've just got to stay on? No,
not really. I have known once. I left on an AM shift, and I came in the next morning and the person I'd handed over to was still there. I was like, what? But someone had called in sick, and someone had had an accident literally as they were leaving home to start their night shift, so she just stayed on out of the kindness of her heart. Obviously, if there would have been a bit more time, then that would have been covered by someone else, I imagine. But it was easier to stay on than try and get someone in at that late hour. But yeah, generally you get to go. The only thing that would keep you is if you've probably not managed your time very well, or it just got busy towards the end and you still have some notes to do.
Yeah.
But generally that's it.
Yeah. Because you hear these horror stories, don't you, of like, working like 15, 16 hours and they're only getting paid for 8. And yeah, I just wondered if that was the same with nurses, but no. Oh, that's good.
You end up staying late, you do get paid for it. So
right. Yeah. Right, Maile, I'm going to read what you've written. You've written government-run healthcare, less money to go around than private, impacts on equipment, charting, lack of Pyx? Pixis.
I don't know what that is. I think that's a US thing.
Oh, Pixis.
Go on, Maile.
You need to teach us now.
So I would say one of the more frustrating things coming from the US to New Zealand is at least in Dunedin, I think in a few other cities it's different, but going back to paper charting and not having an automated medication dispenser, also known as a Pixis. So like Katie was saying before, here you go to the shelf and you pull your medication and you're mixing up your antibiotics, and in the US you go to this like little tower thing, Katie? I don't know how you describe it. You pick your patients. It's got all the patients in there. You pick the patient. Yeah, a touch screen. You go, oh, that's my patient. Yeah, I want these meds, and then it pops out a drawer, and you can only open the right drawer for the medication. So it takes away med error.
Less room for error, definitely.
It's brilliant. And then it gives you what you need. So you don't have to like mix up all these things. You just pull it out.
Yeah.
And you're ready to go.
The most you have to do is break a little piece off in an IV bag and then mix it up. It's like not like here where you're actually mixing by hand and drawing it all up.
Does that feel like a lot of pressure, knowing that you're in charge of mixing their medicines up?
Yes.
Yeah, I bet. What if you got it wrong?
Exactly. But here we double check. So in the States, we only double checked, like some places you would double check an insulin injection or heparin. But here you double check anything that's IV. Like even just a bag of fluids, which you really take for granted in the States. Here you're like, no, you have to have a second signature on that bag to check that it's not expired and it's the right medication. So
I think that sounds very similar to the UK, although granted it's been a long time since I've been in the hospital, and I know they did go paperless after a while, but I had long gone by then. So I did have an element of paper. We'd keep paper charts in patients' homes when I was in the community. But yeah, in the community back home, I was on my own, so I couldn't get anything checked. So I would, be mixing up my antibiotics and, doing IVs and just all of that on my own. But in the UK, in the hospitals, it's the norm to get that checked, definitely. So I'd even, like things like syringe drivers, I wouldn't have a second checker with controlled drugs, which I was a bit like, when I first went out into the community. But that is the only thing that we check now in the hospice I'm in New Zealand is controlled drugs. We have to check out. There needs to be 2 signatures. We just have to have a second check on our syringe drivers. Yeah, everything else we're just getting it from the shelf.
Does that feel liberating or does that feel backward?
Oh, me. I thought you were asking Victoria.
Well, Victoria's used to it because she went out. She went out on the road and mixed her own. But you and Katie weren't. So how did that feel? Did it feel like, whoa, look at me and mix all my medications, or did it feel like, oh my gosh, this is a bit backward?
No, I don't like having the increased risk of error, because if you're pulling medications by hand and having to double check, and somebody comes in and they're trying to talk to you about, a situation with another patient, it's really easy to make a mistake. And the other check that the US had was everything was electronic. So you had a little scanner where you would scan the patient bracelet, and then you'd scan each medication before you opened it up, and it would say, oh, nope, that is not the right medication for this patient. And you could go, oh, shoot. Whereas here it's, you better hope that you pulled them correctly. So yeah, I don't like it. I wish that, and hope that New Zealand will become more electronic with more safeguards in.
I was talking to Sherry, Dan and Sherry, who live in Auckland. They're members on our community, and she's working on the maternity, and she told me that that everything was written down on this paper clipboard. And she said she spent 2 hours going around the hospital trying to locate her notes that were on this paper clipboard. And she said it was just so frustrating. So yeah, can you relate to that? Is that what it's like? Yeah.
Also, like we do have our medications are electronic, but you can't scan them. You have to manually click each one and then chart that it's given. But if someone else is in the medication chart, you can't get in. So you have to kick that person out, or you have to wait till they're done if they're actively using it. So whereas I was on Epic in the States, and in Epic, anyone can be on it anywhere in the world with, the login info and the correct use of it. But you could have multiple users on it at one time. So I find it extremely frustrating and very time consuming, unnecessarily time consuming in this day and age. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of doubling up because we have medication charts, paper medication charts that we have to sign for everything. But then we're also putting that into care plans online. So there's a lot of doubling up of information, definitely.
Yeah. It surprises me that about New Zealand, because they're so ahead, aren't they, in loads of other things, technology wise and things. Surprises me that they're being beaten by the UK.
And the US, from the sounds of it, a lot more.
Well, we expect it from the US, though, don't we, Victoria? Because they do everything. Yeah. They do everything, properly and right. But yeah, it does surprise me. So, are they making a move towards going electronic? Has anyone ever mentioned it, or is it just like this is? Yeah, they are. So.
There's some, I know, like Canterbury DHB, which is like Christchurch area and up there. I think they have some form of electronic. The doctor's offices here have electronic, like, I don't know, it kind of looks like a med chart type thing. Not med chart, whatever. I can't remember one of the ones, but they've got something.
I think aged care facilities do as well, because our doctors put it onto their chart that they use when we discharge a patient.
Yeah.
But yeah, we don't use that. I don't know why.
That's interesting. Okay, what about... Sorry, darling. Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say that's part of why I put like difference in the U.S. There's a lot of private hospital companies that will shell out big bucks for fancy equipment, update all their EMR, which is the electronic medical record system, and then pay their staff less, or make it so nurses just have more patients, so you have less nurses on the ward. So that's also why I put in like privatized healthcare versus government run healthcare. So I think there's a difference there. In the US, you can just have all the fancy equipment you could ever want, but your staff are working themselves to death. Whereas my experience here is there's like on my ward, there's a lot of older, outdated equipment. I think Katie has it better. But the focus is also on, working with the union and making sure nurses are getting paid enough, and that nurses aren't being worked to death and get their breaks. And so I think that influences also charting and putting the money into upgrading everything to an electronic charting system. It's very expensive, and something's going to have to give,
They're much more, do we really need that? Or do we just want it here? Granted, in the ICU, obviously, I think across the board in the whole world, more money is spent in ICU than other places. But we've still had to use the old school, I just learned it coming here, how to hook up a high flow to, I know this won't make sense to you, sorry, Liz, but hook up an old school high flow to the wall. I've never done that before. I've always had a machine that goes between the wall and the patient. And here it was like, what? I can just do it with the oxygen flow meter. And I forget how I did it now, but just, there's still that stuff that happens here. So especially on the wards. And like we used to use BiPAP all the time everywhere in the hospital. You can't use it even in the step down unit here. So just little things like that are kind of strange and different, and they save money, I think, where they feel is appropriate.
Want to add anything, Victoria?
Yeah, it's very different the way that our hospice is funded. I think, don't quote me on this, but all of our wages are paid by the DHB, but everything else is through fundraising. So, they have like hospice shops, and they do events and all of that, and like people that bequeath money. That kind of goes towards everything else, so equipment and everything. And so there's a board that decides what money can be spent on and what can't. So I think it just all comes down to money and what's available. And there is a bit of a make to amend mentality, which I think is that is very Kiwi, isn't it? So yeah, just sometimes if that works, then fine. But that said, I'm in a brand new building with all brand new equipment because the previous building was deemed not earthquake safe. So we did have a big new building completely built. So I've only known this lovely new building. So it's they will pay when they need to pay for things. They'll pay for them.
I like what you said, Maile, because that really struck a chord about the you can have all the fancy equipment and all this and that, but you've got nurses that are just pulling their hair out because they're so overworked. So yeah, I like that, thinking about that, because it sort of sums up the Kiwi attitude, doesn't it? Like, like they might not have the fanciest thing, but they've got the happiest or a happier workforce sort of thing. So can we just talk?
It's funny because I was going to say in the UK, you've got the worst of both of them. You've got the not enough staff and not that great equipment. So
there you go then. What else do you want? Let's talk about.
And Liz,
go on.
Just real quick, in the US, mental health money does not get put into mental health. So I'm very used to having the old outdated equipment in mental health. So
right,
coming here, I'm like, oh yeah, this is the same.
I think that's the same everywhere, actually. In the UK, they've always said that mental health doesn't get the funding. It's because it's not right there. It's not the obvious thing that needs the funding. And they kind of try and brush it aside, and yeah, it's unfortunate.
What about training? So when you turned up, did you all know what to do, or did you need training? And if so, how was that training?
I had an induction, orientation period. So that was, I think it was 4 weeks. So I spent time with various different people throughout the hospice and just worked with another nurse for that first month. So for the most part, there wasn't any, there is some specific training that as and when it becomes available, I do. But yeah, it was basically just showing me the ropes of how it all worked.
Did you feel supported?
Yeah, and I still do. There's always, staff ratio wise, we have 3 palliative care nurses on in the morning. That would include me. And 2 would be in the afternoon shift and 2 overnight. So there's always another nurse to refer to. And there's always, even overnight, there's always a doctor on call. So if you're ever stuck, there's always people to refer to, and they've got a wealth of experience. So yeah, I feel very supported.
Okay. Maile?
Yeah, I would say on my ward, I've felt very supported from day one. But I'm also lucky in that I have a lot of mental health experience. So none of it was necessarily new. It's just more learning how to do it in New Zealand. So yeah, I feel very supported. I really like my ward. But I do know that the other medical wards can be quite chaotic, and that they will even occasionally pull, if we're overstaffed on my ward, they'll pull us to a medical ward. And it's like, we're mental health. We have no idea what we're doing on a medical ward. So I'm not looking forward to that.
It's strange. I find it really strange that the nurses train here. I imagine that it might be the same for you, but they just train as nurses and then decide what specialty they want to go into. Whereas in the UK, you would pick, before you start your nurse degree, you would pick learning disabilities, mental health, pediatrics, like general adult, which would be what I did, or midwifery, you would choose. So I wouldn't know what to do around a mental health patient, well, to an extent. But I wouldn't be able to work in a mental health ward. That's not kind of within my scope. I haven't had any training on it. That said, the nurses I've spoken to say they don't really get much training on it either. It's all on the job. So it is strange to me.
This is totally off topic, but Victoria, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but only from when I had my two kids, when I had my two kids in England, it was like the nurse was above the midwife. You had the midwife, and then she would like refer to the nurse. Like if you had a problem, she said, "I'll just ask the nurse." I don't know if that was just the impression. What in England or in the UK? Who's above who there?
There aren't any nurses in midwifery at all. So they might have a charge nurse that would be a midwife. So that they would be midwifery trained from the start. I think you can train as a nurse and then do a short course, like a 18-month or 2-year course in order to become a midwife if you wanted to. But most midwives would go straight into the midwifery route. So they might have referred to a charge nurse just because that's like the sister, but they would be a sister of midwifery. And I think midwifery-wise, the New Zealand seems to be similar to the UK in that pregnancies are generally midwife-led if they're not complicated. So a midwife you needn't see a obstetrician at all unless you have any worrying things that the midwife has picked up. So you could go your whole pregnancy without seeing a doctor. But I think that's different to the States.
I just wondered.
It's just my experience from, I know that my experience from having my kids in the UK. It seems quite a nice system here because a friend of mine had her baby here in New Zealand and she was able to pick her midwife that stayed with her throughout her whole pregnancy and birthed her baby and then continued checking up with her. So there's a lot more continuity.
That's nice.
You can just look online at all the midwives and see which ones are aligned with your views and how you want your birth to be. And so that was quite a nice way. Whereas in the UK, you kind of get what you're given. You're assigned a community midwife, but that won't be the person that delivers your baby, even if I had a home birth. So it would have just been luck of the draw if I were to get my named midwife in the UK.
Before, how are you all doing for time, by the way? Are you okay for time? I just had a message from Zoom saying, you can keep going. We like you. We like hearing what you're saying, so you'll keep going. So it's 2:00 now. So should we just carry on for 15, 20 minutes and see if we can get through? Is that okay with everyone?
Fine.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. Just before I move on to the community members' questions, so Maile, is there anything else you want to add to that? Because you have written house officers, registrars, consultants and PDRP. Is there anything you want to say?
Yeah, there's a couple of things I want to say. One is just going back to kind of like Katie's frustration with the hierarchy and change happening. The DHB system is going away. So there's a new, and Katie, help fill me in here. There's a new government entity coming in to take over the healthcare. And I think they're helping to streamline or fix some of the frustrations currently happening. Okay.
Yeah, that's all I know as well. It's just the one DHB is what I've heard. But
for all of the one,
just one instead of like Southern
NHS,
DHB. Yeah,
that sounds very similar to NHS England. In the UK, we have what would be the equivalent to the DHBs would be NHS trusts, I think, in the UK. And then we would have NHS England that would make all the big decisions. I don't know how much it helped or helps. It's just more middle management. But
yeah, I think the problem is, like, I know the Southern DHB, so that would be kind of Otago, Southland and Invercargill area, does tend to get the worst rap of the DHBs from what I've heard. People even on Facebook online being like, don't go down to the Southern DHB. You know, like the other DHBs are better run. They have more money. They have better equipment. So I don't know why that is. And I don't know if this would help with disparities across the different DHBs, or if it's just going to make it more of a
we are also
nightmare.
So we cover the largest land area. So we are helicoptering people we've even helicoptered people from Twizel and Canterbury area, Mount Cook, down to here based on the weather patterns. We get people from Queenstown. We get all the traumas from Queenstown. We get from Milford. We get a huge area of people. So it's quite a rural setting as well. And I think we have a much more rural population than the rest of New Zealand. So it's, things are different here, definitely. And for good reason in some respects, but, we also seem even very distant from Canterbury DHB or Christchurch area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So not saying don't come here.
Yeah.
You know, we love Dunedin, but just be aware that the Canterbury DHB is probably more up to date.
Yeah.
It's
but
good
we're getting a new hospital.
Yeah.
In 8 years.
It's good to hear all the different sides of it anyway. I think this is why we're doing this, isn't it? Because if you're coming over here working as a nurse, you want to know the truth. You know, it's all very well saying, oh yeah, it's a beautiful city and everything like that, but what your job is going to entail, isn't it? You know, so it's great what the three of you are doing here is just shining some light, because I wouldn't imagine you can find this information anywhere.
No.
So good on you. Thank you. So Maile, anything else on the registrars consultants?
Yeah, just a quick note that when I first got here, there were all these people on my ward with all these different titles. And I was like, I don't know who the hell is who or who to go to, or like I have no idea what's going on. Part of that's because we work with Otago University, so there's a lot of medical students around. But the hierarchy here is very different than the US, where you pretty much just have like doctor, internist, medical student. You know, it's like, it's not that complicated. Here, there's a lot of new titles that take some getting used to, which I don't know if it would be helpful to go into or not, but just a heads up that you may meet a lot of people on your ward and just try and figure out who does what. Katie, do you want to add anything to that?
There's still the juggle. Oh, that's not my problem. You need to talk to this group, or you need to talk to that group. But generally, I feel like overall, even the registrars, even the consultants who are like, you know, your intensivist in ICU, they're generally more helpful and they're happy to teach you stuff. There's also a lot of pathways here where you are, as a nurse, you are able to just act on the pathway unless there's something outside of that, and then you would notify the team and then they would handle it or help you. So there's I think it's I think that works pretty well because the registrars aren't stuck in one specific area for a long time. They get to see all different types of areas. So they get to work in vascular, or they get to go to urology or cardiac. So they get to see all these different aspects of the medicine, of the medical system. And so I feel like their knowledge overall is a bit better, which I quite like, but did take a bit of getting used to know who does what.
Mm-hmm. I think very similar to the UK, sorry. But yeah, we in the UK, we historically had house officers and senior house officers, but now they're FY1 and FY2, and registrars and consultants. We did have these strange, like clinical fellow, which I think are probably international doctors that have worked at consultant level outside of the country, but need to do something in order to become a consultant in the country. So I think it seems to be quite similar. But it's all, well, where I work in the hospice, it's very collaborative. So you can just chat to one of the consultants or whoever the doctor is looking after your patient and voice your concerns, suggest something, and they'll take it on board. So yeah, it does seem very collaborative.
Yeah, and I'll second that. I never feel like I need to keep my mouth shut about my opinions on a patient, because the whole team, we all listen to each other. There's a lot of people who are invested in this patient getting better from a mental health standpoint and a medical standpoint, and we do all collaborate. And if I have a suggestion or I say, well, have you thought about this? You know, there's very little ego with the doctors here and the medical students. So they don't take offense. They just sort of go, oh yeah, that's interesting. And then we talk about it. And, you know, you call the doctors by their first name here. Yeah. So it's compared to the US, which is, the doctors have so much ego. Just not all of them, but most of them. It's really refreshing to actually feel like you're part of the team and you're not just a nurse.
Yeah.
You're never just a nurse.
Sometimes. You've ever been called staff? Get that from a doctor. Old school doctors will go, staff. You're not any someone with a name. You're just the staff nurse.
Yeah.
I'm just going to run through some of the questions that people put out into the community when I said that we were going to be chatting to you. Maile, are you happy to go forward with that? Have you got anything else that you wanted to talk about on that? We'll probably come up around it anyway in the next few questions, but how happy are nurses in general in New Zealand?
They do like to
we're
know.
not asking Katie. You just mute yourself, girl.
I'm happy to answer for just my team, although I'm not in the DHB, but my team, they do moan about things, and I do think it's like when Kiwis moan about the traffic, and I have to laugh. It's just I'm like, oh, but it could be worse. It really could be worse. Like patient ratios at the moment, because of COVID, we have an 8-bedded inpatient unit in the hospice, and we're at the moment only able to accept 4 patients. So we would still have the same amount of nurses. We need at least 2 nurses on, just to check all of our controlled drugs and for medication checks and things. So there's always going to be at least 2 nurses, and there might only be 4 patients. And palliative care patients, sometimes there are a lot of psychosocial things going on that you have to deal with. So it's probably in that sense similar to mental health side of things, really. But they're like 2 patients, really, like 3 or 4 patients is seen as heavy. And it's in the UK, when I was working on the wards as a newly qualified nurse, I would be in charge of half the ward, which was a 28 bedded ward. So I would have 14 patients. I would have healthcare assistants, like two in the morning to assist, and 1 in the afternoon. But that was a heavy ward. That was an orthopedic rehab ward. So, it's heavy in the UK, and it's only got worse since I left the hospital, to be honest. So yeah, I feel like certainly in the hospice, it's a nice shift. It's always a nice shift, to be honest.
Yeah, I had 3 step-down patients in the US with infusions and alcohol withdrawal and blah 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 blah. So to hear about staffing here, I'm happy that they're complaining, because then it won't get to the way it was in the States or in the UK. So I'm happy, but it also makes me laugh. 100%. Yeah.
What about you, Maile? You living on a nice, happy ward there?
Yeah, I would say we're pretty happy on the ward, but yeah, if it's busy, if it's Kiwi busy, there's a lot of moaning and bitching, and I'm kind of looking around like, we're still able to take a break and like have water and eat and talk to each other. So yeah, it's good that they don't know how crazy it can be. But sometimes I do just kind of roll my eyes like, okay, they're there.
This is a good question. Someone said, how accepted are tattoos, piercing and unnatural hair colour for nurses? So what do you think?
Go for it.
Yeah.
So if you turned up with pink, well, like bright pink hair and all these piercings, they would just say, yeah, okay, you're allowed to be a nurse. They're okay with that?
Yeah. One of our ICU consultants had like pink color. Yeah.
That's good.
I was just going to say, tattoos are quite a big part of Maori culture, and so they wouldn't be able to say no to tattoos.
No.
That's just part of New Zealand, really.
As a little side note, Sunny's girlfriend came for dinner last night, and she works at McDonald's, and she said that she's not allowed double piercings in her ears to work at McDonald's. So you just think yourself lucky, you nurses.
Yeah. Right.
Victoria, sorry, I interrupted you. What were you saying, darling?
No, I don't. There's people with bright hair in my hospice, and piercings, like nose piercings and things. So yeah, no one's said anything.
And that's a really good point about the mouldy tattoos as well. It's very, very. It's the norm in New Zealand, if anything, isn't it? Tattoos. I think that's. I don't know about the States, but is it not? Do you not go for tattoos over there?
I think it's no. I think it's becoming like most people would have to wear a sleeve over their arm or something like that. But I think it's starting to shift, especially if it's a tasteful tattoo or something. It's not like racist or stuff like that. But it, people.
It's not like love hate.
Yeah. So it just. Yeah, like if it was a tribal tattoo, they would be expected to cover it up because it is a tattoo and it could offend someone. But I think it's shifting. Yeah.
All right, I'll keep going because I've got quite a lot of questions to get through. How different is the hiring process, and how are interviews conducted?
We all did it. We all did it by Zoom and things, didn't we?
Yeah.
Because of COVID.
Yeah. But I feel like with a lot of the, like if you've done an interview on Zoom, New Zealand, at least for us, has been hiring overseas. So if you are overseas, you're going to do a Zoom interview anyway. So it's not that bad. One thing I will say is I didn't feel like I had to sit and brag about myself. I just felt like I had a conversation, like it was an hour-long conversation with the manager. And yeah, it was quite easy. I mean, they obviously asked me questions about my skills and whatnot. An interview I went on in the States was for ICU, before I had any ICU experience. Tell us about a time when you provided great customer service. And I didn't say it out loud, but in my head, I'm like, are you effing kidding me? You want me to tell you about customer experience and I've never done ICU and here I am interviewing for ICU? You're joking. Here, it was my skills were worked into the conversation about who I am, where I'm from, what I do. So, yeah.
Oh, I love that. I love that. That's just so much more laid back, isn't it? And more, it seems like they want to know you as a person and what you can bring as a person as well. They're so laid back like that, aren't they, the Kiwis? Maile, how was your experience?
Just like Katie said, very, very casual, curious about my story, why I want to come here. More questions about like how I work in a team, so I think they're less interested in show me how awesome you are, more like how will you fit into the team here. But Katie, I had to laugh because customer satisfaction or whatever, that's such a U.S. healthcare thing. I do not miss that. I'm
sure one of the questions is, how cold was your water? Was your water cold enough? Like, it's that ridiculous. It's just, not really one of the questions, but just like, that's how stupid it is. Like, it just feels, and it doesn't feel like
you're
that.
trying, no, you're in the US, you're trying to keep the customers happy, regardless of what they need. And hospitals get judged on that. And then hospitals get more or less money based on customer satisfaction. It's such bullshit.
It is.
Anyways.
That is crazy. That's crazy, isn't it?
I don't miss that.
It's less formal than the UK, I'd say, the interview process. I had 3 interviews for jobs over here, and they were all just very informal chats. It was there were normally 2 people that were interviewing me, and it was just quite an informal discussion, really. But they did have questions that they asked. But there were I think they kind of understood that perhaps I wouldn't be up to, even though I'd really read up on all of the policies and procedures, they didn't expect me to know any of it. They wanted to have a bit of an idea of how you deal with respecting other cultures. So that's quite a big thing. So I had to have an experience of that I could provide. And just anecdotal kind of experiences with patients and how you dealt with scenarios. It was, I suppose, quite scenario based, but it was an informal discussion. Like some interviews in the UK, if you get to the level where you're going for like a sister or charge nurse position, it would be, you'd have to do a presentation, and there was nothing like that.
I love that. I love that that makes me so proud of the Kiwis, that they're more interested in how you integrate with other cultures and like your well-being and how you are as a person, rather than, I'm not saying that they wouldn't think that your qualifications were relevant, but it's almost like, obviously you've got the qualifications, otherwise you wouldn't be applying for the job, but it's that, I love that they're looking for that in an interview, like it just seeing who the real person is, working as a team, being with other cultures, just it's very holistic, isn't it? It's just, I really like that. Good old Kiwis. Well done. Yeah. Right. Okay. So hang on. Did anyone have a difficult time with the registration process that required you to submit an appeal?
No, I didn't.
No.
It was a long process. I think by the time it gets to the Nursing Council in New Zealand, a person, an actual human being, is dealing with your case. So I think that she might have requested I upload something additional before she formally reviewed it. So I think they're quite sensible, and hopefully it wouldn't get to declining and appealing as much.
I think the only thing, like, I know some nurses who've come from like Singapore or the Philippines or even India. They, if English is not your first language and you're not practicing in English, they'll have you take, and also if you haven't come from, I think it's the US, UK, or somewhere else, but basically even like some places in Europe, you'll have to come and you'll have to do a CAP course, which is basically just kind of like getting you up to speed. And then you have to provide English proficiency as well. I know that can take a few months, like I forget if it's a few months or 6 weeks or something like that. But in any case, I think from the US and the UK, it's quite, the qualifications are recognized pretty readily.
Yeah, because does that answer this question then? They said, how different are their certifications, e.g. ACLS, BLS, PALS? Does that answer that question?
No.
Tell me.
No, those are, I actually looked it up because, so in ICU, we obviously have to have ACLS is advanced cardiac life support, and we obviously have to have that because we're pushing medications to jolt the heart or we're shocking or whatever. But BLS and ACLS are generally the same. PALS, you can take, it looks like they do PALS here. I don't know why I don't have that because I occasionally have to take care of pediatrics, but it's not a requirement for me apparently. But there is a 2-day course in Auckland, and I'm assuming it's the same. I did have to retake ACLS, even though I had just renewed prior to coming here. But it's pretty much the same thing. It's just called something slightly different.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Katie. So someone said, I think this was Priscilla said, since they have universal healthcare, does that mean they have the same policy and procedures across all public hospitals, or is it still unit hospital specific? Does that mean just they do everything the same across all hospitals, or is it like schools, I suppose, isn't it? You know.
Yeah. There's overarching stuff that you can look up online, but generally each unit and hospital does things a bit differently.
Right.
They would each kind of look to the same, like gold standard, or so in the UK we had NICE, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, which I actually looked up, and there is something similar here, and I forget what it's called, and I think they actually work with NICE. All policies will be set by individual DHBs or like settings, but they will all be referring to the same like evidence basically.
Right.
Yeah, or like if we get a pediatric patient, we're not a pediatric ICU, but we're a general ICU, and we will get peds. We will communicate with Starship in Auckland, which is the pediatric hospital. And we will fly anybody that we need to up there. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for a team to come down and get the patient or the child, we'll be using their guidelines to care for the child. So there are things like that it's, the DHBs do communicate. And if there's something that we don't do here, like a specific cardiac case or something like that, we'll call up Christchurch, and then we'll call up Wellington, or, so they definitely communicate.
Yeah. So does that answer the question that says, is there a shared nursing model across all hospitals? Does that answer that question?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
There's probably, you'd probably all just be like going by the codes set by the New Zealand Nursing Council, I guess, and then you would follow policies for individual things that are set by your individual, like DHB or setting. Would that sounds about right?
Yeah, thank you, Victoria.
Mm.
And we sort of talked about this before, didn't we? What's the leadership structure like for nurses? Do they have names such as charge nurse, clinical manager, chief nurse? Like hierarchy? Is that what we were talking about earlier? Are they just all one level?
No, there's staff nurse. Then there's ACNM, which is assistant charge nurse manager. And that would be charge nurse in the States. And then there's, associate charge nurse manager, I think is ACNM. And then I think there's an assistant charge nurse manager, which is above that. I could be wrong because I don't
You just
like
know them by their name.
Yeah. And then there's the charge nurse manager, and then there's the consultants, which are also called SMOs. That's what we've got.
Yeah, we have a clinical nurse specialist as well who handles the education part, but she also will help out on the ward quite a bit. So she's very useful.
Plus educators too. Yeah.
Do you happen to know?
It's fairly streamlined where I am. Sorry. It's we're all palliative care nurses that are on the floor, and then we have just a coordinator of the inpatient unit, and then the director of nursing. That would be the hierarchy, and then we also have a community team that have a similar hierarchy, although they do have palliative care facilitators who look after certain areas in the community that report to the coordinator. And then, they have ARC team, which is the aged residential care team. I think is the same, but I don't know too much about them. But it's a bit streamlined.
It's interesting what you said earlier, though, Victoria, about how you feel as if, or, you can just go and ask one of the doctors because they're not, like, oh, don't ask me because I'm a doctor, I'm important. It's just, it seems to be, the feeling I'm getting is like you could just go to anyone and ask, can you help me? And they wouldn't be like, don't ask me that. Is that right? Am I right in thinking that?
Certainly would be in my hospice, but then it's quite a small team. It's quite close knit, and they're all, quite invested in the patients that we have in our service. So, definitely for me. Yeah.
Anyone want to add anything before I move on? No?
Well, I think you mentioned earlier PDRP. It's not really necessarily an advancement or like you jump a level or anything, but you do get a bonus, and then you get it's just recognized by the nursing council that you may not have to prove, like someone who doesn't do their PDRP may get audited, and have you kept up your end of the bargain with your license and things like that, whereas if you're doing your PDRP, that's proof that you've been keeping up your license, and you get a bit of money on top of that.
Right.
And
there's two different options, aren't there? I've yet to actually start properly doing my PDRP. So you can get proficient or expert. level.
Yeah.
I think
So you start with proficient, because then you can basically just reuse it to do expert. But if you have to do like something special to get expert, so
I think there has to be an element of teaching an expert.
Something extra that you have to prove. So just basically just go proficient first.
But it's people coming from the UK, it's similar to the continued professional development and the information that you'd have to provide every 3 years in order to re-register with the Nursing Midwifery Council. It's a very similar process, but it is also, if you do your PDRP, it is tied into a little pay rise or pay increase. Yeah.
So does that answer the question? Do they support nursing advancement? Is that what you were just talking about then?
That's definitely part of it. Yeah. But like right now we've got, they've opened up an NP position. So one of our ACNMs has gone into an NP pathway, nurse practitioner. So she's training in our ICU. She's doing her classes, I think, probably through Massey University. And she's training with our doctors in our ICU. So she's doing her clinical hours with us. And I think they're working toward that. But right now, I think the country only has like 300 nurse practitioners or something. But clinical nurse specialist seems to be the next step here. But I don't think there's not a good, like one of my clinical nurse specialists said she's been on the same pay for the last 19 years or something crazy. So I don't think there's the same advancement pay-wise as for us bedside nurses or community nurses. But there are a few different options like that. And sometimes they will sponsor you, but you have to have the right visa as well. So like right now, I can't do the critical care course because I can't get sponsored because I don't have residency. I'm on a visitor work visa. And then basically all I have left to do is, I think 2 or 3 papers to have a master's degree, but I can't start that until I've gotten residency. So the only thing I can do right now is PDRP. And then once you do have residency, everything just really, really opens up.
Fingers crossed your residency comes through quickly. Yeah. Is the patient at the centre of the care? And I think this was Eric, and he said, I ask this because sometimes it feels like opening up beds, money and discharges are what drives the US system. Kind of talked about that, didn't we? About the Maile, do you want to say something there?
Yeah, I will say on my ward, one of the things that struck me and still surprises me is that it really is what's best for the patient. And we may have a patient be on our ward for months while they're going to assess their home, doing home visits, talking to the family, doing occupational therapy assessments to see if they are safe to go home and do simple things like make breakfast or use the toilet safely by themselves. And if they don't really pass those tests, then they start looking at, okay, do we put them in what kind of a rest home placement do we put them in? And there's a lot of people involved in discharge planning for, at least for my ward, for older people with memory issues or, chronic schizophrenia or whatever. And they don't seem to rush it. They don't seem to just like, okay, we need to open up a bed, so you're just going to go here. They really take their time with it, making sure there's a community team in place or making sure the family's totally on board or whatever it is. And they'll even do like practice runs where the patient will go home for the weekend to see how they do with their family. And if it doesn't go well, they'll come back and then we'll come up with another plan. So in the US, that would never happen. First of all, you would never send a patient home as a trial because you'd be worried about a lawsuit, if that patient injured themselves or something happened. And then you would just be rushing it in the US. And in the US, mental health is a revolving door because of that, because we just spit them out and they're back 3 weeks later. So yeah, I would say much more so than the US, it's patient-centered and what's actually best for the patient.
That answers that perfectly. You too, do you want to add to anything?
I just know that when my last job in the States was charge nurse, and as soon as the little discharge car pops up on Epic, the house supervisor would be calling me, "When's your patient leaving? When is your patient leaving? I have a patient waiting in the ED for you." Like, as soon as that patient is out, I'm calling for a stat clean on your room, and they would get someone to come in and clean the room. "Oh, here's your next patient." And you would fight it. You would push back because you're seeing what's going on the floor. You're seeing that your nurse is struggling to keep up with her work. That doesn't matter to them because it's all about the almighty dollar. And it's really just pushing beds. It's how quick can we get this patient stabilized and out of here? How quick can we get a new patient in to replace the other one? And here they also don't flex nurses off like they do in the States. So you'll be working, and just say for, like, at the beginning of COVID, we had no patients because no one was coming to the hospital. So they would flex half the staff off, and they'd have 2-3 nurses working the floor. But here, those extra nurses, stay on shift, but also they're helping the patients that are there. Like here we have hardly any pressure ulcers. And I know this might not mean anything to you, Liz, but like that just shows that the patients are a bit more healthier here, but also that there's a bit more meticulous care involved because you're not rushing as much. They really take time to look at the problem and figure it out. How can I help this patient? The number of times I've had a patient where it's like, I don't think that person should be swallowing. And they'll tell me, all right, but this person's at the end of their life. What gratification do they have left? How can we provide this patient dignity? All they want is a cup of water. How can we do that and still provide that for them? In the States, you would just be afraid of a lawsuit and you wouldn't give them anything to eat. You wouldn't, you'd push them toward getting a feeding tube. And that's how it is. Where here it's accepting reality, the person as they are, and allowing them simple pleasures at the end of their life, or, and I would say nursing here is much more beautiful in that regard. Or I think even like with Maori individuals, it's keeping that person whole, not leaving someone alone at the end of life, things like that, where it's really focused on that person rather than, well, I have a job to do, I need to get it done.
Yeah, and just to add on, one of the when I did mental health in the States, one of the areas I would help cover was actually the insurance area, where you would call the insurance company and fight to get the patient's length of stay extended, which means get the hospital bill covered by insurance. And it's such a joke because you have these really sick patients, but the insurance company would be like, well, have there been any medication changes today? Well, have they needed any PRN medications? Well, have they hit anybody? So the doctors would make medication changes that weren't needed in order to keep this patient in the hospital covered. Because once the insurance company is like, oh, we're not going to pay anymore, they don't need it. The insurance company, who's never seen the patient and has nothing to do with healthcare, would decide this patient doesn't need to be here anymore. And then you have to get the patient out because the hospital loses money. So yeah, talking to these insurance agents was maddening. It just like highlighted everything that's wrong with the American system of healthcare.
What about you, Victoria?
I think it's very realistic for, we have a whole team of family therapists. So we have things like art therapy, music therapy for the Fano family, for the patients themselves. We have social workers, occupational therapists, physiotherapists. So we're looking at everything that patient needs, and maybe that we're a short stay facility, so maybe they'll be going home, or maybe they'll be moving on to aged care, or maybe they'll be here for end of life. So yeah, it's just we kind of play it by ear really, and we've got a lot of input, so it is very holistic.
Well, that's a massive yes to that question, isn't it? Is the patient at the centre of the care? Yes. And you just said, I've got this other question, but you've just answered it, Victoria, because are there any social workers and case managers? So there are social workers and case managers.
Certainly in my unit, yeah. Yeah.
What about you two, Maile?
My recent experience going out to the ward and doing a discharge, there's not case management to the extent that there is in the States. You don't have a case manager, and maybe this was just my experience, but I had to send a referral out to the district nurse to get this patient her long-term antibiotics. I had to do all these other things that normally would have been done by a case manager, but we had to figure them out at the bedside. We do have social workers, but I don't have, like in my last hospital, I had a social worker and a chaplain who was assigned to my unit, and I would know exactly who to call. Where here, it's like you just call the line, hey, I need a social worker, and someone will get to it when they get to it. And they're not as heavily involved in the patient as they were in the States, in my opinion. But yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. We have a social worker, but I hardly ever interact with her. It's mainly our associate charge nurse manager who becomes kind of the case manager for the patient. So she sends out the referrals. She does a lot of the coordinating. And even our registrars and health officers will do some of the coordinating as well. So it seems like the pieces that the case manager would do sort of get spread out to the nurses and the and other staff.
Okay, I've got one more question. How are inpatient rounds typically conducted? Is nursing involved and other disciplines involved? Katie?
Yes, for us.
Oh, Victoria, yep.
Sorry. We every day our doctors that are based in our hospice would go and do a ward round, and we don't, as nurses, we don't have to be there, but we do tend to choose to, because generally we've only got one or two patients. And then we would have a multidisciplinary team meeting every morning as well. So that would involve the physios or OT, the social worker, doctors, nurse, and I think pharmacist. Have I said that? Yeah, there will probably be about 6 different people just discussing what the patient needs and any changes that need to be made.
Hi, Margaret.
Ours are with the registrars, the senior medical officer, the consultant, and that's pretty much it, really. They come to each bed space, and they talk about the patient. And really, I think it's Margaret, stop. It's generally like a teaching moment for the registrars. And then the nurses definitely can have their say, and we'll ask for anything we need or whatever we need charted, or we need them to come do things like that. But I think, and then out on the wards, it seems to be a good time for the new doctors, all the level of doctor trainees and seniorities and whatnot, to essentially get educated on the patient condition. And sometimes the nurses aren't really as involved there because they're just too busy to get there. Obviously in ICU, we just stay at our one spot, and that's pretty much it. But yeah, pretty similar, I guess, to the States. We just don't have case manager, social worker. We don't have a pharmacist that comes with us. She does her own stuff. Yeah.
Anything you want to add, Maile?
Yeah, I think our ward is a little different. So Monday and Friday morning, we do like a quick touching base with the whole team. And then every Wednesday morning, we have our multidisciplinary team meeting. But we do have a pharmacist. We have an occupational therapist, consultant, registrar, house officer, trainee interns, clinical nurse specialist, associate charge nurse manager, and there's probably one or two other people I'm forgetting. So yeah, we'll have like 10 people in a room, or now multiple rooms because of COVID, and the nurse just talking about goals of care for the patient and any changes that are needed.
Oh, well, I don't want to let you go. I'm like, I like talking about this. It's just so interesting. But we've been going now for nearly 2 hours. So, I just want to, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for everything you do. And secondly, I want to say thank you for joining me on this Zoom call, because what you've just done for other nurses out there who are coming to work in New Zealand is absolute gold. Because just shedding light on that is magnificent. Can I just quickly ask you before you go, Victoria? I mean, I watched all three of you come over before you came to New Zealand, and I listened to your doubts, and what you didn't know what to expect, and all your questions that you had. Has your experience been better or worse, or what you expected in New Zealand as a nurse?
It's certainly better than the conditions I was working in the UK. It was probably what I expected, because I had done as much research as I possibly could. So yeah, I mean, that said, I wasn't expecting quite the patient ratios we have. So in a sense, it's better because I can give really great focused patient care. Sometimes though, I feel a little bit like my wings are clipped. There's certain things that we don't do, like things that we would call district nurses in for, and I'm like, but I was a district nurse, I could probably do that. So, but otherwise, definitely it's a better environment to work in, definitely.
Maile?
Yeah, I would second what Victoria said. I think it's a better experience overall. There are some things that nurses don't do on my ward that I would do, especially when I was doing hospice in the US, like just inserting Foleys, or I guess that's the main one. But it's like, I can do that. But the doctor does it.
We don't do IVs or anything. The doctors would do that. touch an IV. Apparently, we can't even remove an IV cannula because our hospice doesn't cover that. I mean, for us, healthcare assistants do that in the UK, you know.
If you were to give one piece of advice for a nurse coming over to New Zealand to work, what would it be? Just one piece of advice. What would you give her, Victoria? Or him?
Ooh, yeah. Her, him, he, yeah. Either.
No, but what I always tend to say nurses, and I always say she, her, and then Emil said, "Excuse me," you know. I'm like, oh, you know.
No.
Let's not forget our male nurses.
Yeah. It's hard to say actually. A bit of advice. I think don't be afraid to ask for help. No question is a stupid question, because it's a completely different system to what the one you've worked in before. So although your clinical skills might be the same, there might be slightly different processes and policies, and there's just different ways of doing things. So just you might just feel like you're a bit stupid for a while, but generally everyone has been really happy to help or offer advice to me. So I just wouldn't worry too much about that. Any patient load you have is not going to be anywhere near as bad as you've previously had to deal with for most people. So there's always generally going to be someone there to refer to.
Katie, piece of advice?
I would echo Victoria, but also just with that, just be open. Just really basically everything Victoria said, and just be open. Yeah. Be open to new things, be open to change. I mean, obviously if you're moving here, you're probably already open to change. So just try not to be too shocked, and yeah.
Thank you. Maile?
Yeah, I would echo both of them. I was going to say the same thing. It's going to be, you're going to think you're really experienced and you've got it in the bag, and then you're going to show up and be like, why do I feel like I just started nursing? And that's totally normal, and it gets better. And also check your ego at the door. So it's great to have a different background and different experience, but don't walk in being well, we wouldn't do it this way, and that's not how we did it, and why the hell are you doing it this way? Kiwis don't really appreciate ego. So they will listen to suggestions, but tact can go a long way.
Okay. Oh, well, thank you so much, you three. Really, really, really appreciate you spending your time today with and doing this for me, and for all the nurses out there. So just big shout out and a big thank you to you. Love all three of you. You're gorgeous. All I ever think when you're talking is, if I wasn't very well and I was in hospital, I'd really want them looking after me. That's all I ever think, is like, I'd love it if they looked after me. So well done, and thanks very much.
Oh. Well, thanks if they've made it this far. Well done to the community.
Yeah. Are you still? Hello. Well, we had fun.
You get the prize.
No, I did think that. I thought, but you know what? If you're a nurse, you could go on. You just wouldn't want this to stop, would you? You'd just be like, just please keep going. So no, I don't.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This is valuable stuff. So, right. All go and enjoy your Mondays. And thank you very much once again. And I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Liz.
Okay. Bye, girls.
Bye.
See you, Margaret.
Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast this week. We have loved having you here with us.
If you love this week's show, please share this with your friends. Send it to anybody you know that wants to think about moving to New Zealand, and get on over here yourself.
And tell them how brilliant it is as well. And also, if you haven't signed up for our free 5-day video guide, showing you what life is really like in New Zealand, then go over to the website and sign up. You are missing out. This is brilliant. Go over to www.nzahead/free and we will send you 5 days worth of videos about what life is like in New Zealand. You are going to love it. So one more time, that website that you need to sign up for the free 5-day guide is www.nzahead/free. So we're going to see you next week. Until then, have a great week and we'll speak to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Say bye again. Bye.
Bye.